I think actually we're at this interesting moment where there was a book that James Mann wrote a few years ago called The China Fantasy, which got to the heart of this question. He said, for years we've been operating on the presumption that as China becomes more prosperous, becomes more integrated with the rest of the world, this will lead necessarily to the kinds of institutions and political culture that we recognize. And he said, and it's time to let's call our own bluff and say it's not happening. And he wrote that 10 years ago now. I mean, people will remember it. And
2006, I think.
And he was right. And in a way, it took us a while, I think, to absorb that idea and to then build it into our model of what does that mean for China. Because then at the same time, China has continued to reintegrate with the rest of the world at the same time that its political culture is moving in the opposite direction. So, I mean, in a sense, this is probably an obvious point, but one that I often have to remind myself of when I'm writing about China is the difference between declarations and facts on the ground. I mean, the single biggest collision between the writers who live there and write about it all the time and people who come in occasionally and write about it is that I think if you're coming from outside, you are much more likely to say, well, look, they said that they're going to build 10,000 windmills on the hills of Hubei, and if you live there, you go to Hubei and you find out that 60% of them are not actually connected to anything, and they're spinning. So being on the ground, there is, not being captive to the proclamations and being actually, I think, faithful to the facts is harder than it sounds.